Okay, so Dan, thank you very much for agreeing to do this training, and if you'd like to get started, this would be great.
Yeah, okay, hi. So when Ali asked me about this, I had, couple of, doubts and how to do that. And I said, let me go with a network management and Yang overview, just to try to get you all on the same page and then tell you what you should be looking on as a reviewer. So to start with, how I structured this at the beginning was just as a general overview of more on the network management problems that need solutions, and then put there a little bit of overview on Yang and netcoms. And after that, I'm going a little bit deeper into Yang as a language, data modeling language, and then essentially trying to point out what you as a reviewer should be looking out. Where I believe that for most of you, you should be more looking out at the semantics and not as much as a syntax. The Yang doctors are really good at looking at the syntax, but you, as the experts in the area, you should be more looking at the semantics and is it semantically done correctly. So one of the biggest things is that what we are fighting today with the network management is that there are many different syntax and, that devise different syntaxes, even from same vendors. You will have different syntaxes, and even there will be different semantics. And that is one thing that we've been trying to do that. So IETF has tried to do modeling first with the SNMP and, with the SNMP as a protocol, and then MIB and ASN, that has been trying to do that for a while, but still those were all fairly complex, and we were really trying to make it, more human operator friendly, as well that it can be used, for programmatic purposes. For that, there has been two major efforts in the IETF happening. One is the netconf, and the other one is the Yang. Netconf essentially is a protocol and allows us to communicate with the devices, and essentially it's a bunch of RPCs. There are a bunch of standard ones, and allows us to send and retrieve data from the device. But the missing part there was really the data modeling language, where we could essentially model the functionalities that those network devices was providing us, and it was universally understandable between multiple systems. The Yang as a data model, it really defines the functionalities. Actually, it describes the functionalities of the device, as well as determines in the structure how you can communicate with that device. Where the protocol, essentially is just how to view and manipulate the data that was defined with the Yang model. And in this terminology, what we will be using, although a lot of people are talking about Yang model, I want to focus on Yang modules. When you are reviewing, you will be mainly reviewing Yang modules, because multiple Yang modules can be within a single model. And when I start reviewing of it, I'm always looking at individual modules on itself, and after I review the individual modules, I'm looking how they're fitting into a into a single model. The other terminology that essentially is important to know, and this is where a lot of things are changing at the moment, are the data stores. We had essentially we had 2 data stores previously, but now we are adding more data stores, and there has been a design team working on it to better define how many different states of data are in the process of sending it down to the device, and when, and essentially when it's being in the process of committing it and becoming active on the wire. And the 2 parts, where are essentially the configuration data, and when and the state data, essentially the operational data, because there are multiple states there are multiple data stores that are storing the config data as well as the state data. From a high-level architecture, the netconf is a 4-layer protocol, and it provides transport, RPC, operations, and content. And the top 2 layers are essentially modeled in Yang. The operations and content are modeled in Yang, and the transport and the RPCs are the ones that are, exchanging this information. So since I forgot to add to this, but it should be RESTconf, because RESTconf has actually very similar architecture, just that there are some differences in the in the transport. There are some differences in the transport, because RESTconf is more modeled as a as a RESTful protocol versus the netconf. So how does Yang help the network management? You're providing a single standard, and where you can communicate with the devices and how you can manage those devices. At the same time, it is it provides a hierarchical config of a data model, and the idea is that you will be able to reuse as much as possible those models as well. That you will be easily to augment, because you might have a smaller common data model, and for vendors you will have vendor-specific augmentation, or you can create your own specific augmentations for the for your own business rules. And the last part is that it's a really well-defined versioning rules, that you know exactly which version of the model are you using and at what time. The other part is also, which is important, that we really want to have a clear differentiation between the config and the state data, that we understand that this is the config data, this is the state data, and the other part is that we want to model the state data, because you are not always need all the state data that is reported. You want to provide the state data that is important for you as a network operator. And this is one thing that we are now also working in the Yang to be able to make those definitions, those operational states better modeled, and they can be better, better used for your own purposes. So before I continue further, is that clear? And I should have asked at the beginning. I presume you all had some basic netconf. You have some basic understanding of netconf and Yang. Okay, I presume the silence is a positive answer. So for the reviewers, what is really important to you when you are reviewing a draft? You want to, as a general comment, you want to provide is how well is the draft written, and are the issues and the solutions well described. Here is essentially saying, okay, looking through the text, can you understand what was written there? And it's just like a regular draft review. But when you're starting to review the models and the modules, here are you're starting to look into it and a little bit deeper. And here, what I would recommend to you is that you should really focus on the semantical point of the modules. The 6087 bits provides a lot of syntactical recommendations how to do that. They also say how the modules should be defined, and I will go into that. But this is something that usually the young doctors will go through, and they will give you they will look through those recommendations. The one area where usually we see some lacking is the descriptions. Are the descriptions inside the modules well written? Because this is that it will enable the the human operator or the developer to understand what is this functionality, as well as the user, essentially, that will be using those, to understand will they be able to use that functionality correctly. The other part is also that they should have operational and they should have config and operational state data modeled. We still have internally within the working groups and the teams, we have some differences of opinions how that should be, how should that be modeled. Should they be very clearly separated, or should they be more mixed? And we will have to see what will be decision on that part. The other part is where you could help a lot is, do they offer a superset that is common across multiple vendor implementations? Because this is one area where vendor implementations are modeled very differently. And from that perspective, some models might not be easy to implement on one or the other by different vendors. And then trying to get their vendor neutrality and taking what is the best solution there is something that you can make a big difference. And this comes down to the next one. Actually, I should have written here, are the modules friendly to implementation across multiple vendors? From my own experience, one of the hardest ones is the QoS. How to model QoS that will be friendly to different vendors, because QoS is very much hardware dependent, and there isn't much flexibility, in order to do that. And from there we also then go how reusable they are. The idea is that you don't want to have multiple different models and modules that are providing same functionalities. You want, for example, if you would look at the access list or the filters, you want the access list to be reused in multiple areas, where they can be used. You don't want to have multiple access list models out there, because if we start breaking up the same functionalities into multiple different models, we might run into that. We will end up again with too many different models, and then it will be too many different implementations. And this will mainly start biting when you will try to do services across multiple providers, or you will have multiple networks that are still managed by a single admin, but they might have different models. If we will provide more models of the same, in that case, people will start using them in the wild, because they say, oh, this is a little bit better for me than the other one. So instead of me augmenting the other one, or doing some change to the other one, I will just use this. One. So that is one thing that I am a little bit worried about. That's sort of my personal worry, how to make sure that people have most of a common use. And then when you are having in the example sections, are those examples showing the use cases that were described in the draft? And are there any examples missing that you would like to add in order to clarify the document better? Any comments, questions before I go to the next one? Okay. So when I was doing this presentation, I was using as a baseline the work that the Young Coordination Group worked on, and that is the work that was led by Carl Moberg, and Benoit and myself were contributing to this work. So one thing that I used, the text we have used in this deck are the models here and the modules, but we would also, actually I would also encourage you that you read the 6087 BIS, because every time when you're reviewing, it gives you, some good hints and, how to do that, but that is, you can do that at the same time while, while you're reviewing the model. So I will walk you here how to create a, essentially, I will walk you through here how to create a young model based on a single use case and what tasks, have to be done. For that, we'll explain you the some of the young nuances that when you're looking at, and you're reviewing this, that you will be able to see and try to you'll be able to see and try to apply those, some of those young nuances when you're reviewing the models and the modules. In the task number 1, we have to enable the interface, and in this case, what we are doing, we are using as an already an existing management, an existing model, and we will look into that model. So how is it structured? What are essentially are what we said before? Are those requirements satisfied? And how well was it done? So if you look at the interface management model structure, it's saying you have the read-write part and the read-only. And in here you're saying, okay, I will be able to configure the interface as well. I will be able to read, and I will be able to do that, and I will be able to read the operational state of the interfaces. Now, this is defined in two, separate but top-level containers. In this model, you have the separation, clear separation of the config data and operational state data. And to be frank, this is my preference. This is my preference as well. If you're looking, essentially at the interface list, you're also then saying, hey, look, okay, here's my model of the interfaces. Are my interfaces modeled that they are easily applicable across multiple vendor implementations? And if you're looking, at the, at the model, you can find out that it was abstracted clearly. And then when I'm doing, essentially the example of an instance data, then I can see, does it well translate into different vendor implementations? Now, when we want to write this into a module, the module has to be defined according to the RFC 6087, and it has to have the namespace definition. It has to be defined based on the recommendations in that BIS. So you also want to, if you have to import some other young modules, you want to define this is the organization with which it is, which is the contact. And the revision, essentially the revision of the module. Which revision is it? Because the versioning is really important. And not to forget the last part, the description. Put in description of what this module will do as as a general high-level description. Those are the those are the important parts that, based on this, you can already see, yes, this module has been done. The baseline of the module has been done according to the recommendation. Now, when you're starting to define the containers, and I prefer working with the containers and defining containers for the basics for the basic functions of a model. For example, in the ACL model, one thing what I like to do is essentially saying, okay, I will have a match container and an action container. So for those two containers, because filters or ACLs are always defined by a match condition and by the action condition. With that, both of those are easily extensible, and we can put in the basics of that inside. And essentially, if somebody has to do the augmenting, that is easily augmentable. The same thing, goes with the, in this case, with interfaces. We can say this is, our, for the interface description, and if you have to add some specific interfaces, you can easily augment, this container with the new interfaces that you can create, that you either have to create or that you as a vendor that you can create. Now, when you have a container, you really want to create lists of the, essentially of the functions that you are defining inside there. So in this case, we will have lists of interfaces, essentially and lists also of interface states. Based on that, we can we are saying, okay, this is the config data and the operational state data, and we can essentially looking whatever was configured can be also then get information, the operational state of about that configurational statement. By the way, just for the clarity, if somebody can reply back to me, because I'm not sure if you're still on.
Yep, yeah, we're seeing you.
Okay, thank you. An occasional just hum or yes would be helpful to me because as I'm as I'm talking. So within within the list, we can now define a leaf, and within that leaf, we are saying, okay, this is my interface name, and this essentially defines that single defines this single interface.
Dan, I hate
yes?
to interrupt you, but you said something on the previous slide, and I hadn't registered it, and then I saw it as you were flipping. It says the list defines an interior data node in the scheme. I had a long discussion with folks that you're actually allowed to put lists in the outermost level of a module. It's not really a good idea, but it's not actually hard to articulate why not.
I would have to.
I was told by several people it was legal, and it was like, hmm?
No, it's so. Yeah, but so this is one thing that I would definitely not recommend. But if you're starting just to put the leaves out there, if you put the leaves out there, it will be very hard to keep the hierarchical, config tree and operational state tree.
Yeah, well, it'll keep putting the list out there in the top makes multiple things hard. My point was, it's technically legal. A Yang compiler won't complain about it, but it is something that people ought to keep an eye on. I think it seems to me it's a bad idea.
Oh, it is definitely it's definitely a bad idea because you're making the your model flat. And that will make the modularity as well as the filtering and searchability really hard.
Thanks.
So I would never recommend that.
So while we're going back, could you go back 3 slides? There's something I tried to ask you a question on the chat.
Which one?
One more. So when
this
you
one?
say yes, correct.
Mm-hmm.
You are correct. There, you are saying that you have 2 top-level containers, either 1 entry per config interface or 1 entry of interfaces and state. Could you comment how this will be changing with the revised data store model?
Oh, I prefer not to do that. Because I haven't looked lately into the work of the of the design team, so there are some. So the operational state data and the config data there are a couple of things. One of them is you will put in the configuration that you have DHCP for the interface. But then your config data in the RO will essentially the operational state data will be the IP, will be the IP address. Although, yeah, this is now operational data because you received that information from, in this case, from a DHCP server. But in which exact data store, I can't remember now because I remember the first draft that I read. I looked, but I can't remember exactly where is this going in, where is this going into, and which, and then we will, based on this operational data stores, we will then also then define in which, where this will be written. So until that work is done, and I really can't comment on that. This is based on the, this is done based on the existing, this is done based on the existing RFC 6020.
Thank you.
The other thing is we only have 60 minutes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to go through this. So I'm defining leaves. Yeah. So here, and the next one is, so here, there's sets of data types, and what we've seen is that people should be using more of those data types to make restrictions what can be put into the, essentially what can be put into some of the leaf values. You can create some limitations what can be put in there, and what we are really saying, if you can use it, just if it's there, use it. Make sure that you will limit the values that that can be inputted, and that is a good tool. And this is something that you can also take a look. Are the minimum and maximum, if they want to define some minimum and maximums, are those well are those well typed, etc. The so on this now a little bit of Boolean, but for the leaf types, where this is more for you that you have when do you want to use them. In this case, on the interface, is it essentially if it's enabled, then you're instantiating it, and then also you can say if it's a what type of if it's a config data true, it's a config. If it's a config data false, then it means it's a it's operational state data. On the enumerations, so here's one thing is that I'm not a big fan of enums, and especially I'm not a big fan of enums with if features, because one thing is on the I prefer using groupings, and I prefer using the augmentations over if over the if features. Now that's my personal preference. This is a perfectly legal, and many people are using if features in their essentially in their models. In my opinion, if you are starting to add many if features, depending on the vendor implementation, and we will use if features to add different vendor implementation specifics into the basic model, that is something that I very strongly disagree with. But if there are some cases, and I'm blanking now, where this could be useful, then I would say yes, go ahead. But in general, if you're seeing too many if features in the model, I would always say, well, guys, take a look at that. This is something that I would not, that maybe we're trying to hide some vendor-specific implementations like that. And same thing, with the enums. Enums are not easily, they are not extendable. So for that reason, yeah.
So Dan, my understanding is the enum is not extendable. I mean, it's not augmentable. That why they didn't allow that to be augmentable?
No, because I don't know that. That's something that
because it really. So really, the only let's say you have something that would be an enum in a modern programming language, but you don't make it in Yang because of this restriction that you can't what you have to use is you have to define a base identity and then define all the identity refs. And that seems like kind of a strange syntax, but that's the extendable way to do that.
AC, you define a set of derived identities.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, that's what I meant. Derived identities that reference the base identity. That's what I meant.
That are based on the base.
Right. And that's the way you implement. That's the way you implement an extendable. What I'll term as an extendable enum. Now, there's another way, which is the choice. But the choice is extendable. But choice is meant not for necessarily a homogeneous list of values like this. It's meant more for if you have different heterogeneous, mutually exclusive values. So you don't want to use that. Now, choice is augmentable too, right?
Yes, choice is augmentable.
Right. So it's just a point. I can think of enum would be good, might be good for something like enabled or disabled, something where it's not likely to ever change, something where there's a few values that aren't likely to change. But otherwise, it's pretty much useless if it's something like a list of, let's say, link types. You certainly wouldn't want to make that an enum because that's going to be need to be augmented down the road.
But people are using it. I saw in the modules that I reviewed, and in some of the drafts, I saw people are using it quite a bit. And this is something that I that you also described. I dislike very strongly.
Yes. Okay.
So you prefer identities?
Well, so my choice is to go through groupings and the identities. That's my preference.
Thank you.
So you can, even if you need this something, and the Yang allows you to define your own type defs. And this can be a very useful tool if it's used, if it's used with care. And that sometimes, if you can, it's worth keeping that in mind because people try to use something that is not that doesn't fit well, but telling them, hey, why didn't you try to define your own new type def? And it would have simplified, that would have simplified your, that would have simplified the model that, the module that you were creating. So here's my, my problem is with the conditional leaves, and that is, with the features. So if it's done right, it can be very helpful. But often I see that people hide vendor implementations behind it, and in that case, you are, you're running into, into problems with that. Again, here I will leave you to that, that you can make the decisions by yourself. But in the ACL, in the ACL work, we had, we've been asked why don't we use e-features for certain match and actions, and it was because certain vendors were supporting certain match conditions and the other ones did not, and the other ones, and and vice versa. So again, if you would start having a lot of these, you would run into problems. But where most useful feedback would be from the operational network operators guys, to say, yes, this is something that we use very often, and in that case, I'm supporting it, put it in as an e-feature, because it's a very often used, it's a very often used one, and it's fairly common. But if it's just to hide, the vendor implementation to put it into the standard models, then then I'm against it. In that case, I'm always recommending to go with an augmentation. So we are coming now to the part that AC already explained. So with the identities, and then with the essentially with the identity refs. So this is one example how you can add more interface types to that. And here you can see, if you create that interface, how that interface would be represented in an XML representation. The reason why I added it here is you always want to see some XML examples in the in the draft. You want to see how how the module was done into the XML. You want to make sure that the XML matches the the modules. If that is done correctly, this is how you can verify also that the young modules that the author was was essentially testing what they were doing, what they were writing up there, as well. Where you can take a look, the state of the module is going to. Oh, I forgot to add that link. It's Benoit created a young validation tool, which is available. Oh no, now that's available every time when you submit the draft. A young validation is being executed, so that so that you can always verify if there are any problems with it. But you always want to see in the example sections, are there some XML examples to see how how that was how the schema would look like that would be pushed down to the devices. Now, when you are looking at the state tree, you are saying, okay, when I'm looking at the operational state data, what essentially what state data, how the state data is described. Is it something that is is that information really useful, and are those state data really representing the functionalities that are being described in in the module? Here is one example for what has to be done there. It's one of the things is what I've seen people forget is really the timestamp. When was it changed the last time? Because that is, for example, a really important part of the data that from when is it, that it's not stale. And then it's just this you will have different stats, things like that. But this would be the couple of key things when that you want to see there stated, and how does the tree look like, and what is the does it also give you the state, actually the freshness of that state data. The imports is on this is one thing is that when you're using imports, that I personally like having smaller modules that are a function, and then I'm importing those modules to create a a bigger model, or either bigger model or a or even a service model. I like to do that with the with imports. So if you see if you see imports, that's usually a good sign, because they are reusing some of the modules. If you see, one thing also what I would encourage you to look for is, do they when they're creating their own module in the draft, when they're creating their own modules in the draft, are they breaking up into logical functionalities and then importing them into the main module? This is some of the designs that are good to do, because if you have to do some of the changes down the line, it is easier to change, that change might be easier to be done than having to change the whole model. Changing a single module in general is easier than the whole model. Here's just an example in order how to do that. and you know, when essentially, you know, making sure that when we are making the, for here's the example for the date and time that we are, you know, creating the rough type, and that the pattern is correct. So this is you know, just another example. And here is when you want to do, you're saying, okay, referencing a, you know, a leaf. So I want to get information from different leaves, you know, that I have, and I can then specify the leaves. You know, I can specify the paths to those leaves, and I can retrieve, you know, this information from them. So again, this is just an example on if I want to, if I have a main module, let's, you know, if I have a main module and I want to retrieve something, actually I have a main leaf, and I want to retrieve something that is associated with that main leaf, then I can essentially use the leaf ref in order to collect that, you know, information and do, you know, do it as a single representation. Here is, you know, on if you want to assign, you know, an IP address. So in this case here, we are saying again, if I just go to the next one, is we know we are importing the interfaces, and now we are just doing an augmentation, and we are augmenting the essentially the interface definition with a new container, which is for the IPv6. So with interfaces, in this case, what as an example was there, okay, we are just making it as interfaces, but now we want to add different functionalities, and we want to support IPv6. So as not all interfaces support IPv6, it was a good idea to put it out and then use the augmentation in order to add it. Again, here, I'm, you know, this is where I'm showing you as an example. You know, if we would use the if feature, the IETF interface would grow into a really big module, and it would be, yeah, in my opinion, it would look pretty much like a chaos. So once, you know, once we decided that we want to augment it, here is a definition of a, essentially we said we have a IPv6, which is a container, and we are saying it, you know, it consists of an IP address and of essentially of a list that has an IP address, and it has, you know, essentially a prefix length. With this, you know, we can now, with this container, we can augment different modules where we want to have, you know, the IPv6 support. And here is just the example of the instance data in the you know, in the XML. How are we doing on time?
We're okay. We do go to 12:30. It's only 11:48. Keep going.
Oh, okay.
You can speed up a little.
Okay.
But this is very useful.
So and then this is, you know, the task 3 that because we had, you know, to those configurations, and the reason I'm using is just to point out, you know, certain things, which was when I was going through that, this was helpful. So now we want to say, okay, now we have to enable, you know, the label switch path, and from there we will have, you know, the config data, and what we will do, you know, with the config data, because MPLS is new functionality, we want to create a new container that will be, you know, for the MPLS, and then we will create another container which is, you know, which will be for the essentially for the LSP definitions and the, you know, and the configs. And from those we can now essentially create another one container that will be for, you know, for static ones, because in this case we were just saying here we are doing static. If you would, so we could have done immediately just static LSPs, but that would be a bad design decision, because we are then losing again, you know, this hierarchy. We are going, you know, back to, do we really see that, you know, the config and actually the data representation is done hierarchical, so that we can cover multiple use cases from a top level, you know, from a top level down. And in this case, what we are saying is following. Oh, sorry, I have to point you back to this one. Because in the container LSPs, we are saying you will be using static LSP main. and the static LSP main is the grouping. And now in this grouping, I'm providing a list of what LSPs are, what LSPs we will be, using in essentially in the container LSP, in the container static LSP. Now, this was, pretty straightforward. It's just, we are providing a key, leaf name, and then we have an ingress and an egress container for, for the LSPs. And with this part now, we can change if there is a, if we have some differences in the ingress and the egress part, but there is, also part that is a common between all of them, and we are putting this, as the same thing as a, we are putting it as a grouping. So in this case, what we are saying is, okay, for the common parts of all my LSPs are defined, with the next hop incoming label and the push label, and then I can essentially apply them to the ingress and the egress. But if I have to do any changes on those, I can essentially augment this container to make it specific to the use case that that I need. And here's again, the example data in the XML. Yeah, essentially, yeah, that would be end of this. Yes.
Dean, this is Sue. Why don't you just go back one slide?
Yeah.
2 slides.
2 slides. Okay.
Can you describe, because I think it might be useful for all of us, the type MPLS-T label and where that came from?
Excuse me, which one?
Incoming label on the grouping static LSP common. Incoming label where you got the type. That just might be useful.
So you're saying, just a second, you have container, you're saying this container ingress uses static LSP common?
I understand uses common, not a big deal. I just thought one thing you didn't go over, or maybe I missed it when you came in, was that you have the type INET IP address. That's pretty easy. We have the type. If you go into that, you have the type MPLS-T : MPLS label. You might indicate how you define that someplace else. That might be useful.
Oh, okay, yeah. So on the so we have the INET type, and so there is a set of, and it goes all the way up front here. Second. So it is based on the, just a moment, it was for the, so the IP type is defined in the IETF IP, and the MPLS-T is defined, in the OpenConfig MPLS LSP model. So what we were doing there is we were importing the, the MPLS-T, and there were all the MPLS types defined that, in this case we needed the MPLS label. So so that was defined in that draft, and we used it, from that draft how the MPLS label was defined there.
And the reason you can do that is because you used an import.
Yes.
That was the point.
Though I do need to comment that one of the things that's important with these with the modules is to remember to think about the normative references and what the model is depending on, because as we go to actually publish a lot of these documents as drafts, as RFCs, the dependencies have actually caused issues in a couple cases. So we have to have normative dependencies which are going to be stable and are considered as, standards. So that ends up being one of the gotchas with some of the space.
We just have to move faster, right?
I would love to see it going faster, as you well know, Chris.
Well, so besides moving faster, we should be because here we are working the software interfaces, and there is a little bit of a catch-22. From my personal experience, I know that some vendors don't want to implement until it's a sort of clearly to being a standard, but until you implement and start getting results from the implementation, you will not know if you covered the cases that you need. And the question is here how we can, how we can get those modules tested by different people. Essentially, how those modules can be verified that they are really useful based on some implementations. There are some implementations coming up, and that is helpful, but still many modules are essentially there are some exceptions from the groups that are essentially doing the implementations, but many modules are just proposals that are not being implemented and that are not being tested, so we don't know if this is really the good one or not.
Ali, I just wanted to put forward, I understand that your warning here, or your caution. At the same time, though, I think we do see a real benefit, right, from standardized types, like we're doing the routing types draft. So, I mean, we want to balance. I don't want to scare people away from using common types too, because that makes implementing schemas, and models easier.
Oh, common types are incredibly important. In this case, it's more concern about having dependencies on work that's not being stable and standardized, right? I mean, that's
right.
We are a standards organization, and we do have rules about normative references, and it's something that has come up as an issue, and it's not, a reflection on the quality of that work, because sometimes it's quite good, but it is a reflection on sort of the stability that we end up looking, that the IETF process by default looks for normative pieces. So I totally agree with you that it's really useful to have well-defined types and to do reuse. And it's one of the things that, as you well know, of course, I've been encouraging the design team, for the architecture to be looking at, is saying, here, can we do some common usage and refining it. But if I can pull back a second to Dan's comment about implementations, that's something that I share the concern on, but one of the questions I'd say is, what type of an implementation, or what aspects make it a useful test of the model at hand, right? Because sometimes we obviously, some of these models are server-side implemented, some of them are implemented on routers, some of them may be implemented in other areas as well, on controllers. What about implementation of the model helps us understand better its quality? Is there anything we can do to categorize that in a meaningful fashion?
Operators. Very simple. Having operators review the models more.
Okay, but having operators review the models is not the same as your point that a number of the models are not implemented yet.
Yes, but then again, the operators will say, well, we are using this or we are not using this. I can tell from personal experience that the first review by an operator of the ACO model happened in December 2016. And they said, but I'm missing these things that I really need to do my work in the network. And by the way, all three vendors are supporting this one way or the other. So now we are up, so we are trying to model it, based on this, operator input. But they provided very good input on saying, this would be a using.
I hear you, and that's frequently the case. What I was looking for in this context is some help for chairs who are reviewing documents and saying, is this ready for last call, to you know, I mean, we can always and should always be asking about, you know, are there implementations of this model? How has it been used or deployed? What is it, you know, what are the concerns around it? But if we can, but it's also very easy to have models that are implemented on a controller side or, you know, in a project where it doesn't actually, you know, a prototype type of thing where it's not actually deployed, and that's fine. I mean, these are proposed standard, and we are trying to get them out there. And there is, as you said, a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But if we can define or describe a little bit the aspects that help tell us, oh, here, this implementation, you know, this was implemented, and it's a useful implementation because it found X, Y, Z, or it's being used in this way, or, you know, figuring out some of those nuances. Because we go back and forth, of course, in routing about, you know, which areas require, or which working groups require implementations, and even, you know, sometimes working groups which don't normally require implementations can say, well, this is kind of a large piece of work and we need one. So trying to get some sense there of what the balance feels like.
Yeah, so one thing is what I always would say is does the model and the modules, are the answers yes to the questions, you know, that I put down here. So those would be, you know, from the, you know, from the working group chair to see are those, you know, are those requirements satisfied? You know, there could be more, but essentially, if most of the answers are yes, then and you don't hear any major objections, then you can say, well, sure. In that case, the working, you know, the working group last call, we can go into it, but and then what you said about implementation, that is a different story. But it would be nice to get implementation reports on you know, on the modules. I know also for the ACL, two of us did the implementation report. It was you know, two vendors did those. So asking for implementation reports and having people present on the implementation report, that is also something that would be helpful with determining the, you know, the last call.
Okay, thank you very much. So, are there any more questions? Okay, Dan, thank you very much